Hey friends, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie and today I'm back with another chatty video talking all about cult classics. Now you might remember me doing this video a couple of months ago and it was mainly centered around cult classics that I don't have in my collection with a couple that I do. This video is going to kind of be like some that I have or even some that I had in my collection that I don't anymore. So it's a little bit of everything basically. So let's just get into it. So starting with some cult classics that I don't have in my collection, there are actually a couple more from Island P that I wanted to talk about. I think the bulk of them are their multi-chromes, specifically shades like Birefringence or Cygnus Loop, because I'm sure longtime viewers of my channel know I wasn't always the biggest fan of multi-chromes, and so those were polishes that I just never cared to have in my collection. Even though I am a fan of like the colors, you know, it's just like one of those finishes that, I don't know, just like wouldn't do it for me. And so anytime I would hear people talking about like those shades as being these must-haves, very similar to Eclipse, which is the black to red multi-chrome, I would just be like, okay, like, yeah, I guess, but I'm like not interested at all. You might remember me talking about Eclipse in my first video where it was a cult classic that I finally added to my collection and I like actually understand the hype now, but I personally don't think I will be adding Birefringence or Cygnus Loop to my collection anytime soon, even though again, I do think they are beautiful and I have like come around to multi-chromes now. I just don't think they're polishes that I would actually end up like wearing all too often, but I definitely do like them a lot more now than I did in the past, where I can like see why they are cult or fan favorites. Another super popular one from Island P that I feel like is always recommended and talked about is my Private Rainbow, which is one of their toppers. Island P definitely has a lot of beautiful toppers and I do have a couple of them in my collection, but I never picked up my Private Rainbow, and even now it's not one that I'm like itching to get, mainly because I feel like I just already have it in my collection, especially when it comes to like a more simple kind of topper. I don't really need like multiples of it, you know? Though I know that is like a little hypocritical to say because I have like a whole drawer full of toppers and I'm sure I have a couple of like scattered hollow toppers, for example. But to be fair, the only one that I like bought initially was China Glaze's Fairy Dust because that was just more than enough for me when it comes to a scattered hollow topper. So I've always been curious for the people who love and rave over my Private Rainbow. Is that like the favorite of the ones that you've tried? Like how does it compare to, you know, Mooncat or Hollow Taco, for example? Because while I know in like some ways, especially under a macro lens, there might be some differences, more or less, or at least like to my bad eyesight, they're all the same. And the last cult classic from Island P I want to talk about is Rosewater, which is this beautiful like silver linear hollow base with a pink shimmer. I feel like I always see people like gushing over it and I think it is pretty, but I don't know, I'm just like not the biggest silver linear hollow person, even though arguably that's like the strongest hollow effect you can get on your nails. I guess it's just a little too much for me personally, but even with the pink shimmer, I'm just like, you know, it's like kind of cute. I guess maybe it's one of those that if I wore it myself, maybe I would feel differently about it, but I know for sure it's just one of those polishes that I've seen, you know, look beautiful on other people, but I just don't have that same like feral reaction over it the way that I would with like just other kind of shimmers, for example. I feel like Mooncat even had like an exclusive rewards polish that looked almost identical to that one, and it was just so crazy seeing people like go crazy over this polish when Island P has it like readily available, but I know, you know, Mooncat fans can be very intense. So I feel like I really did talk about a lot of polishes, like cult classics that I don't have in the first video. So it was honestly just kind of hard to think of other cult classics that I would want to talk about in this video. But there is one that I have noticed like somewhat recently from Bee's Knees Lacquer called Lemon. It was just a super sheer kind of shimmer polish with a really strong strong like yellow shimmer, and it's just another one that I don't understand the hype over. Like, I love yellow polishes, I love shimmer polishes, so you would think that, you know, I would really love this polish, and it arguably would be unique to my collection. I'm definitely not saying I have something similar or, you know, like I've seen it so many times before. I think there is like an element of it being unique, but I don't know, it just like doesn't really do it for me. I think though, mainly with Bee's Knees, it's because it's one of those shimmers that is just like so sheer. And as I've mentioned in a couple of my previous videos, especially like recently, sheer shimmers have been just kind of like pissing me off, where I know that like a lot of shimmer polishes are going to be a little bit on the sheer side, like Island Pea shimmers, for example. They're gonna need 3 coats, right? But even with the 3rd coat, a lot of the nail line is obscured, and I feel like there's a lot of Bee's Knees shimmers that 3 coats looks like 1 coat of another polish, if that makes sense. And so with Lemon being like a pale yellow kind of shimmer, it makes sense that it is gonna be like incredibly sheer, but yeah, I don't know, like maybe I'm just being too harsh on it, because in theory, I feel like I would like it. It's a cute shade. Unfortunately, it's just one of those shades that I don't really care about. Next up, I want to talk about polishes that I had in my collection that obviously I no longer do, either because I destashed them or I just never repurchased them. I actually want to start with the ones that I never rebought, because I noticed that those were like just all drugstore brands. Unsurprisingly, some of the oldest polishes that I had in my collection, so shades like Essie's Mint Candy Apple, Cute as a Button, and Angora Cardi. I feel like those 3 were such staples in my rotation, especially like in the early days of my nail polish journey. Cute as a Button was easily one of my top favorite polishes, but eventually, you know, I ran out and I just like never rebought it, and I feel like it kind of ties into a lot of the cult classics from my first video, like specifically the ones I don't have in my collection being mainly drugstore brands. I think it is common where a lot of us start out on drugstore nail polishes because duh, that's like the most accessible. But then once we discover like indie brands and boutique brands, the drugstore ones just, you know, aren't as exciting. And it's definitely not to say that like they're bad quality or anything, especially nowadays. I mean, Essie definitely has improved their formulas, so it's not that I'm like scared of rebuying an Essie because it's gonna like be bad quality. I don't know, there's just other brands that I would rather buy from, whether they're indie or boutique. And you know, these days I especially am more interested in specialty finishes, so I just don't really see myself like needing to buy creams, even though those do have like such a special place in my heart just because of like, you know, the nostalgia. As I'm sure you know though, I have a lot of pink creams, but even with all the ones that I have, I one day would love to just have a bottle of Cute as a Button, just because that's kind of like how my journey started, and it would be nice to still have a bottle, especially with like the wide brush and a better formula. And when it comes to cult classics I ended up destashing, Essie's Wicked was actually one of the more recent ones. And I know it might sound so silly, but like it was kind of hard to let it go just because I know it's like a cult classic shade. But if you were watching my destash series where I was going through all of my reds in my collection, I obviously have a lot of other reds that are like very similar, if not exact dupes to Essie. And again, I feel like these days, you know, my taste is just more towards like indies and boutiques. So I would rather keep one of those as opposed to just a mainstream brand that I don't really wear as often anyway. It really is like so silly, but I feel like there is just this element of like almost peer pressure where every fall, you know, all the Instagram girlies are gonna be pulling out Essie's Wicked and OPI's Linkin Park After Dark. And so there was a part of me where I'm like, okay, I obviously need to keep those shades in my collection, but it's just not that serious, you know? And when it comes to boutique brands, I feel like the ones that stood out to me were from Mooncat, specifically their shade Dark Horse. You might remember me talking about Dark Horse back when I first started like my destash series, where it's just one of those shades that is so popular, but I just like don't get the hype. Maybe it's not actually like a cult classic, but it's a shade that Mooncat is like pushing to be one, because I feel like it's always on their social media that, you know, it's like, oh, this is a bestseller, and I feel like they say that about a lot of shades, but some of them I completely understand, like House of Hades or Flight of the Monarchs. But I don't know, personally, I just don't see Dark Horse being on that same level. So the fact that it is like one of their best sellers is just so shocking to me. In a similar vein, there is also Mooncat's Millennia, which is one of their magnetic polishes that I feel like they've definitely talked about before, you know, like winning awards or something. And that is crazy to me because I thought Millennia was like one of their worst polishes. I love it in theory because it's just literally like a galaxy in a bottle. And, you know, sure, they have other polishes similar to that now, but I feel like it's still regarded as like, you know, the OG, and so it's like highly revered. But that one was just so freaking sheer on me, and I just don't think it's like great quality the same way that their other magnetics are. Like, they're just so much more pigmented, and Millennia was just not cute at all. And whenever I see people bring that up about it being so sheer, people are always like, oh, but you know, you could just layer it over a black base. And like, yeah, sure, but I feel like you shouldn't have to do that in order for the polish to look good, you know? It just reminds me so much of back in the day where neons like had to have a white base coat underneath to like really pop. And then once like there were brands who, I don't know, I guess found better neon pigments that were just like so much more opaque, there was no need to still see brands release these like really thin, you know, sheer neon shades that needed a white base because like we moved past that. If they reformulated it so it's just like more pigmented, similar to some of their other magnetics, I would totally get it. But I don't know, maybe I had a bad batch issue or something, but I was like not impressed at all with that polish. Moving on to cult classics I have and actually love in my collection, I want to start by talking about Island P's Aspen. This was from the Winter Resort collection a couple of winters ago, and it's just this beautiful like dusty teal in that jelly, hollow, flaky kind of finish, which the finish alone is already my top favorite from Island P, so I'm always just gonna like love it. But the color is so unique and definitely not a shade that we see really often. I feel like because of that, people are always like, Aspen is one of those shades that you need to try from Island P. It is just such a standout, and for good reason. I mean, I absolutely adore that one and can totally see why it's a cult classic. I feel like this video would be incomplete, or at least this part of the video, if I didn't talk about the Harvest collection. This was one of their fall collections a few years ago that just had this like micro flaky or large shimmer particle kind of finish in these deep jewel toned fall colors, and it was just stunning. It is arguably one of like their best fall collections ever. I think a lot of people would say that it is like the top fall collection they have done, but I totally understand why Harvest is like on the pedestal that it's on, because it is just so stunning. Island P's shimmer polishes are so interesting because they really do vary, where some of them are like very finely milled shimmers, and then others like the Harvest collection are much larger, where again they almost look like micro flakies. I think because they have such larger like particles, it just looks so stunning on the nail, giving it this almost like metallic sort of look as opposed to a softer shimmery glow. And it's especially gorgeous in like the deeper fall colors. I know that even back when I first got that collection too, that I wasn't crazy about like some of the shades being similar, specifically Hayride and Pumpkin Patch. To a degree, even Autumn is very similar because it's like a very orangey, like coppery brown. So, you know, realistically, you probably don't need like all of the shades, but I still just wouldn't be able to choose between them. I think they're all so freaking gorgeous. There is one more polish I do want to talk about, but it's kind of in its own section where it's like a cult classic that I have, but I feel conflicted about. I'll give you a hint. It's from Cirque, and it is unfortunately Coronation. I have like talked crap about this polish, or mainly I've talked crap about like Cirque bringing it back 17 times in the span of like 6 months, and specifically how they've marketed that polish as being, you know, limited edition, so exclusive, but they like continuously bring it back. So like that's annoying, right? But the polish itself, I hate to say, I think is just so pretty. Even though I know we have seen so many purple bases with a red shimmer, even with a hollow sparkle. It's like not unique, but when I did like, you know, my comparisons and stuff, I'm like, okay, but you know, there's not like an exact dupe for it. The closest for sure is Island P's Ava, but I feel like even that one was like a little bit more sheer maybe, or just like lighter, where I think I would need an extra coat of the Island P to match or be close enough to a dupe for Cirque. So, you know, in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, if I didn't need that extra coat from Island P, it would be like an easy, okay, yeah, this is the better polish, right? But because Island P requires that extra coat, I'm like, okay, well, obviously that means Coronation is like a little bit better. But at the same time, I cannot bring myself to destash it or even gift it to somebody. I just like, I love the shade. And I know with Coronation, there isn't that element of FOMO for me where it's like, oh, but you know, it's this exclusive polish. But then thinking about the price point, where I'm pretty sure it retailed for $18.50, that is crazy. Obviously, I'm very fortunate enough to have received it in PR, so I didn't have to like pay for it myself. But thinking about like, if I didn't get it, would I actually buy it? Because I know in the very beginning, like when they first brought it back, the FOMO was definitely stronger because it's like, oh my God, yeah, it's this one cult classic from Cirque, you know, from I think 2012 when it originally released. And even though it like has been, you know, reformulated or whatever, I arguably like the new version where it just has more hollow in it. So I feel like I probably would have bought it because there's just something about it where it's like, that's Coronation, you know, or at least Coronation 2.0. I feel like that's such a specific kind of issue with this polish in particular, but I would love to know if any of you guys have something similar where, you know, you have something in your collection, but you feel conflicted about it. But anyway, that wraps up me talking about cult classics. So I really hope that you enjoyed this video. Definitely let me know what are some other cult classic polishes that you think of, and whether you have them or don't in your collection. I really hope that you enjoyed this video, even though the majority of it I think was me talking about ones that I do have and why like I think they're worth it. I really hope that it doesn't come across as being like too pushy or like encouraging FOMO in any way. As a reminder, there are a ton of nail polish brands out there, so we are likely going to see a specific combination just be repeated. I'm sure if you watch like my other videos, whether it's like my wish listing videos for PPU or HHC, or even just my regular like swatch and reviews where I'm doing comparisons, you can see that there are a lot of similar shades. So stay strong, especially if you're on like a no or a low buy. Try not to fall into like the FOMO marketing because we likely are gonna see something like it again. Anyway, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.